In our example with Dixie, Everclear, and Fireball, we talked about testing your triggers one at a time as you build them. It's much easier to fix a small mistake right away than to troubleshoot an entire slide full of triggers later. But what happens when a trigger doesn't behave the way you expect? Let's go through some of the most common reasons and what you can do to fix them. The first thing to check is trigger order. Storyline processes triggers from top to bottom within each object, timeline, or player element. Let's say you're using a slider for navigation, and as the learner moves the slider, you want the topic title to appear before jumping to that slide. When you preview the course, the slider immediately jumps ahead before the title appears. The reason? The jump to slide trigger is listed above the change state trigger. Since triggers run in order, Storyline never gets a chance to show the title first. Simply drag the change state trigger above the jump to slide trigger, and it'll behave exactly as intended. Next, check the timeline visibility. If an object's visibility is turned off, meaning the little eyeball icon is hidden, the trigger will still fire, but you'll never see the result. For example, if you set a trigger to change the state of a title card when the media completes, but that title card's eyeball is off, Storyline can't display it. Turn the visibility back on, and your trigger will work. Another possible issue is choosing the wrong when statement. You might have meant to trigger an action when the timeline starts, but accidentally selected when it ends. In preview, nothing happens until the very end of the slide, which can make it seem like the trigger's broken. Double-check your when selection. Fixing it to timeline starts usually solves the problem instantly. Sometimes you'll see unassigned appear in a red box in the trigger wizard. That means Storyline can't find what the trigger was supposed to act on, usually because you deleted, renamed, or copied an object from another slide. For instance, if a trigger says change state of button submit to disabled when timeline starts, but the button doesn't exist on the new slide, Storyline flags it as unassigned. Open the dropdown, select the correct object, and you're back in business. Another problem happens when the trigger points to the wrong object or state. Let's say you meant to show a specific object when the slider's variable equals 3, but the trigger is actually assigned to a different object instead. When you test it, the second object pops in at the wrong time, and the intended object never appears. Adjust the trigger to target the correct object, and your problem is fixed. You can also run into issues when a trigger is attached to the wrong layer or slide. Imagine you're trying to play an audio clip on a layer called Bio when the learner selects an icon. If you attach the trigger to the base slide instead of that layer, the audio won't play because Storyline is looking in the wrong place. Move the trigger to the correct layer and the sound plays as expected. Another common issue involves object stacking order, when something else is sitting on top of your interactive item. For example, you have a trigger that says, jump to next slide when the learner selects button next, but during preview, nothing happens. Looking closer, there's a large transparent shape layered over the button, blocking it from being selected. Remove the shape or move it behind the button, and the button will start working. Finally, keep an eye on variable values. If your trigger is tied to a variable that never actually reaches the required number, the action won't fire. For example, you might set a slider to move in increments of 5, but your trigger activates when the variable equals 2. Because the slider never lands on 2, the trigger never fires. Adjust the condition to match the variable's possible values, and everything works again. These examples don't cover every possible situation, but they should give you a strong foundation for troubleshooting your triggers. Most of the time, the fix is small. A visibility toggle, a misplaced trigger, or an incorrect condition. The key is to test as you go and make small adjustments early before your project grows too complex to untangle easily.